Hello everyone. Please feel free to switch your camera off during the reading. I'm going to switch mine off, and then in a minute I'm going to share my screen. So now I'm going to go share my screen. Okay. There. So this piece was prompted by documents and witness statements from a recent planning application in Dorset, England, where I live. The application was for a certificate of lawful use. The paperwork concerned a caravan in a field by a wood which had been lived in for many years. Names have all been changed. Statutory declaration. I, David Marshall of Oak Farm, Beaton, Dorset, do solemnly and sincerely declare as follows. I acquired the property called Land Adjacent to Oak Farm in May 2019. At the time of the purchase, I already lived next to the land, and I've known the land since I was a kid, so I know its history. There is a residential caravan which has been present on the land for as long as I can recall. The caravan used to be occupied by Michael Dunnock, who kept cows on the land. In the early years there, Dunnock's father lived with him. I believe Dunnock lived in the caravan from the 1970s until his death in 2009. Dunnock was a scary man. Witness statement 1. I, Jeremy Digby, state as follows. The land adjacent to Oak Farm has been used for residential purposes for many years. I know that Michael Dunnock lived in the caravan on the land near the wood for about 43 years. When I was a kid in the 1980s, I used to have to walk past the land, and it's true that he was quite a scary character. Witness statement 2. I, James Cornett, state as follows. About 40 years ago, Michael Dunnock, who at that time was living in the caravan on the land next to Oak Farm, met me late one night when I was sitting outside on my doorstep. He asked me to help him move his caravan into a shed he had built for it on the land. I agreed. He continued to live in the caravan in the shed on the land for as long as he could until he died. Michael Dunnock was a strange man, not quite right, and a bit of a recluse, but I found him harmless enough. Witness statement 3. I, Ross Pugler, state as follows. I have known Michael Dunnock, who lived in the caravan in the bit of barn on the land, since for most of my life, and I am now 56 years old. Michael was a bit of a character. He looked after some animals on the land and had an old tractor he used to drive along the lanes. He was very well known in the local area. He lived in the caravan as far as I know until they took him away and he died. Witness statement 4. I, Harry Sidney, state as follows. I first became aware of Michael Dunnock, who lived in the caravan in the shed on the land near the wood, when I came home from university in 2000. He was a strange local character. Michael Dunnock used to walk into town to get his groceries, and if I ever saw him when driving on the road, I would pick him up and give him a lift. I never got much thanks, but never really had a problem with him. I think that in the later years, before he died, he began to spend a couple of days a week at an assisted place, but still went home to his caravan on the land near the wood for the rest of the week. Witness statement 5. I, William Coker, state as follows. The land with the caravan on it borders our farm. I was born in 1983 and Michael Dunnett was living in the caravan in the shed on the land for as long as I can remember. He was a strange man who terrorised us children and my mother. Witness statement 6. I, George Baker, state as follows. I have known Michael Dunnett, who lived in the caravan in the shed on the land by the wood, since October 1973, when I moved into my bungalow. I think he was a smallholder and had a few cattle he looked after. Michael Dunnett was a funny old devil. We had a bit of trouble with him once and I had a go at him. He quietened down after that and I never had any more trouble from him. Witness statement 7. I, Brian Marshall, state as follows. I am David Marshall's father and I own the farm adjacent to the land with the caravan. I cut a hole in my hedge to give Michael Dunnett easy access to his caravan. Social services used it when they visited him. I knew Michael for about 50 years. He was a bit of a character due to his illness. When he was bad back in the day, he would jump out into the lane with a Hessian bag over his head and ask passers-by to give him a cigarette and really frighten them. Michael was a bit threatening. He could threaten to cut with knives, but I never found him trouble and managed all right with him. I used to meet the doctor and be with him when Michael needed his injections and medication to make sure he had them. George's illness made him think everyone was trying to poison him. Beaton is a duller place without him. Witness statement 8. My name is Anthony West, and I am going to tell you as much as I know about Michael Dunnett, who used to live in the caravan in the shed on the land next to Oak Farm. Michael suffered from schizophrenia and was not easy to manage. He threatened somebody with a knife, and to keep him out of an institution, he moved with his father into a caravan on the land in the early 1970s. In 1975, his father died in a tractor accident on the land. My father and uncle lived near and tried to look out for Michael as best they could, being neighbours and knowing his situation of schizophrenia. Michael stayed there as a recluse until social services took him into a home around mid-2000. As I believe, he used to come back to his caravan for 2 days a week, right up until 2009, when he died. Final witness statement. I, Andrew Victor John Campbell, MRCGP, state as follows. I was formerly a medical practitioner working in Beaton, Dorset, between November 1980 and July 2009. Michael Dunnett, of the caravan in the field adjoining Oak Farm, was a National Health Service patient registered with the general practice of which I was a member. I was involved with his medical care alongside psychiatric staff and social services. Michael Dunnett was well known in Beaton as an unusual individual, driving his ancient tractor into the town from his home. He lived a simple and eccentric life, based in 2 caravan-type structures, surrounded by old farming machinery and animals in the field, which I believe he owned. As he became more frail, I would visit and carry out medical assessments for him in his home caravan. Following Michael Dunnock's death and my retirement from the medical practice, there are no medical records available to give me more precise dates and details. But I can confirm that, without any doubt, from my arrival to work in general practice in Beaton until Michael Dunnock's death, I was aware that he lived in the caravan, in the shed, in the field, off Ash Lane, near Beaton, in Dorset. End of witness statements. No decision has yet been made on whether the caravan can stay in the field near the wood next to Oak Farm. The new landowner, David Marshall, is still waiting to hear whether the right to live there will be permitted or considered illegal and made extinct. That's the end.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. And we already have a nice comment from Richard in the chat there for you. So we have a bit of time if people have questions and comments.
I just wanted to go a little further from my comment in the chat, just to say this is it's a beautiful story, which is very ghostly, very ghost-like, and yet it tells us an awful lot about living on the land in Dorset, about how the farmer Cokers, by the way, are an extraordinary clan because they own a lot of land on Dartmoor as well, and I think Cornwall as well, actually. It tells us about farming. It tells us about the relationship between land and the people that I think is so much more fraught now, and therefore that where you wrap up with the whole question of whether continued living in this caravan is going to become illegal, extinct, as you use the word. It's as though, you're saying a way of life is being made extinct. And I just think it's beautiful. I think it's a very simple piece, and I think it tells the story very poetically.
Thank you. I was hoping that from that very precise situation, I'm very interested in land rights, who has the right to live in the countryside. It is a type of Indigenous lifestyle. It's a very genuine way to live. All communities had people like that who lived in that sort of way, who are not allowed to live in that type of way anymore for the most part. And I hope also it could be extrapolated out into a larger, more universal picture about our right to live on the earth, on the land, as part of a wider system.
Although I think there are still many caravans parked in fields near to farms it's still lived in, illegally or otherwise, because it's a way of life that has been around for a very long time.
Jess has her hand raised. Jess?
Hey, I don't know that I've really managed to form a sensible question, but I just wanted to thank you, Sarah, because the thing I was going to present, and I'm not, because I'm dealing with family illness this couple of weeks, but I think the thing that I'm really touched by that piece, and I don't know if it's something you want to talk about more, is this idea that there's an extinction that's internal, that's happening, that's cultural in us as people. And this story for me demonstrates a particular example of that, a certain kind of loss of humanity in this, and I mean by humanity, a humanness that makes sense somehow. that there's something we're losing along the way, and these stories where sort of common sense and land connection and place-based living and exceptions to rules for those who need it, things like that are becoming harder and harder to access, it seems, and that's something in us that is endangered. I don't know, does that make sense as what I got from it? And I don't know if you want to talk to that anymore.
No, I think there's really good points, Jess, and I think there's certainly quite a lot in here about how we make room for other people as well as other species, but this is a human-focused piece, apart from the cattle who hover in the background of it. But yeah, it's that about how do we make room for other people in a way that is not providing for them and managing their lives for them, but how do we make room for them? How accepting are we of that and other people's oddnesses?
And our entanglement with otherness of all kinds is they're bound up together, and they're part of the same thing. Yeah, thank you. It's a very moving piece.
Oh, well, I'll raise my own hand and just say that I was really interested in your choice of legal processes as the way of voicing this and creating such a vivid picture. And also by the supportive statements by many of your subjects' neighbours.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because like all these things, the situation that I took this from, which this is an adaptation of, is a real situation. It's bound up in a much larger set of planning issues and who has the right to reside on land around that area as well. That's been going on for 20 years. So that there's a very sort of rooted, deep past to it. And I first came across these set of documents I based it on because I am a parish councillor, and this application for the retention of this caravan that nobody lived in but people wanted the right to live in came up before the parish council. So there I was as a parish councillor in the position of having to express a publicly recorded view on somebody else's right to do something on the land, which was quite an interesting situation to be in, to put it mildly. I have to say, I mean, the parish council had no right to make the final decision. It just came before them for their views as a consultee that would be taken into consideration. So right from the beginning, I was interested in those structures of legality and permission that surrounded this.
And I think you made the fact that you are reading from what would be generally a very formal, deadly doll, supposedly entirely without emotion planning document into. There was just something about the repetitive language and the way that you delivered it that made it feel like a fairy tale. It felt, it's the kind of language, the kind of language that we. It made me think of Neil Post. Who was the filmmaker who made The Land? No, I was thinking about The Land of Nod and those wonderful kind of weird animations back in the. Anyway, never mind. Thank you. Yeah, that's right. And there's such a beautiful poetry in the way that you delivered it, as well as the fact that you were able to extract that from the text and make a performance that way really added a lot to it.
Well, perhaps that's something I learned by doing the MA with poetics of imagination, because there's a whole year of looking at that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, Daphne, you've raised your hand. Yeah.
Also, am I unmuted? Yes. Also, I love that a caravan is something that's supposed to move, and this is about the caravan being static. and just that, the deliciousness of the word caravan and all it implies. And yet the anchor had been thrown out.
Shall I out you here, Daphne, as my fellow caravan owner and fiend?
Yep, that's us.
Yeah, me and Daphne both own tiny micro caravans, which we egged each other on to buy on the same day last year.
Which actually is as a result of the MA.
Yes, yeah.
So there you are. And where we make our work now. So.
Okay. Any more questions? Yes, Matt.
It's not really a question, although you might, I don't know if it will turn into one, but I just really liked the way you brought it and didn't attempt to explain what you were doing. Didn't attempt to sort of sit on the table and say, we've been talking a lot over the last few days about what it means to open a conversation about ecological loss. And I feel like if we all went away now and wrote up some notes about the conversation Sarah's just opened, I suspect you'd get quite a lot of different answers, and that you just left a space there. I'm resisting saying where it took me, but it reminded me that some of the panels of the last 3 days that gave me the most were the ones that are in those terms, but the ones where I wasn't expecting it particularly. The panel on chronic and flaring illness just really gave me another way of looking at mass extinction, and that was not what I was expecting. So yours had that quality too. Thanks.
And thank you, everyone.
Yeah, it was fascinating to move from Mirko's, global planetary mining presentation to your very local, detailed, specific instance, but also something that could widen out to much more. Thank you, Sarah.